Welcome, everybody, aboard the Tabletop Express. I am here today for the first episode of Creators Corner, where we talk with creators and publishers about the game they've produced and the experience behind that process. And we also take a moment to get to know them a little bit. And with that, I'm so excited to have Dan Kazmaier here. Dan,
Hey.
Thank you. This is obviously the first time I'm doing this, and I'm so excited to get to start with you. I think I started talking to you just via Twitter, probably around the time that you started working on Kickstarter for Chai, the initial game.
Right.
So it goes back probably about a year ago. But can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, who you are, and kind of what got you into this hobby of board gaming in the first place?
Into the hobby. Okay. Yeah, I guess we all grew up playing like checkers and trick-taking games. For us, it was Rook. So we would have like relatives come over or my dad's friends from church, whatever, and we would play for like 5 hours during camping trips. I really liked The Hobbit. So for like a school project, I made a Hobbit board game or a Risk variant, Civilization, all these games growing up. It wasn't until about grade 13 that I started playing chess pretty competitively. I have a bit of asthma, so dropped out of the soccer team at school and tried the chess club, and a month later went to nationals. So I've kind of been playing that off and on, I guess semi-professionally for like 15 years or so. It's been a blast, but it's only been one game. So I was in humanitarian aid for 4 or 5 years before board games, and I was coming back from Iraq actually. And my uncle introduced me to Puerto Rico, just on like a layover in Toronto. So yeah, totally hooked. I looked up Euro games and it's like, oh yeah, there's stuff beyond chess and Catan. And we had like 50 board games off of Kijiji the next week at our house. So yeah, haven't looked back, been enjoying not only the games, but the board game community, which is super inviting. So yeah, that's been our adventure so far.
Well, I think you say something that's really important, which is the board game community being very welcoming. And for the most part, I'd say, obviously, there's always an exception to the rule, but it really is a welcoming community. And for the most part, a pretty friendly one. Very accessible now, too, thanks to the internet with Facebook groups and things like that. One of the things that I've seen with you is you started a Kickstarter, obviously, for a board game called Chai. And this game caught my attention for two reasons. One, the theme obviously extremely catchy. I don't know that there was too much along that theme or immersive, the immersive nature of kind of that kind of gameplay. But you also create a game that, when it's beautiful, but it's a fun strategic game. What got you into this idea of, I want to make a game? Because it's one thing to say I played Puerto Rico and I liked it and I'm playing games. But it's another thing to go through the process of actually making your own game.
Yeah, well, it just came out of a conversation between my wife and I of, let's figure out something cool we can do. We both have a graphic design background. We've done web design, all that sort of stuff. So even brochures. And it kind of was a blending of both worlds where we realized, talking to some other publishers like Roxley, they're out of town. They do Santorini, Brass, and a bunch of other amazing games. They said it takes about 3 years to actually publish a game if you're just a designer, because it goes through like a pitching process, which could take 2 months to a couple years, and then you find a good publisher. Everything lines up great. You figure out graphic design, different rule changes and all that, and then you have to figure out how much the publisher is taking on it, how much is the designer taking on. So for us, we decided let's try to do it our own way, and we took a chance. We invested a little bit and threw it up on Kickstarter.
The theme. Obviously, I know I've read a little bit about your backstory, but this theme obviously means something to you. This idea that, and again, on point, you've got a good taste for these teas. I think one of the coolest thing about in the game itself is this idea that even if I want to make one of the teas, but I don't have it, I have to now go take it from one of the other players, which means there's cost associated. A simple action, but this theme of the different types, I'll be honest, because I'm not a tea person. I definitely love my coffee and I love my beer, but I've learned something from it because I didn't know there was this many different teas to begin with. Where did the inspiration with the idea in terms of combining it with the actual strategy of a game? Because it's not just a beautiful looking game with a great theme, which I think great theme is an overrated statement to begin with.
Sure.
But it actually plays well. So how do you mix those worlds together and make a game that delivers on all those levels?
Yeah, well, we don't have a lot of games under our belt from a design standpoint, but there's always been a discussion of, do you start with the design first, or do you have the mechanics first? Because there's a lot of cool games that the game is brilliant, but the design thematic wise wasn't an afterthought. Like it could be in space, or it could be a cowboy game, or fantasy, whatever it is. So for us, we started with, we'd love to do a game on tea that is for the whole family. And with that stance, we had to figure out like, well, there's different kinds of teas. We didn't realize that the majority of what North America consumes is herbal, like peppermint, all these different fruits. But then the rest of the world, we consume, green and black, oolong. They all come from the same plant, but they're different than herbal teas. So we're trying to just figure out how these mechanics work. A marketplace kind of seemed friendly to board gamers, but also really accessible for other people. So the majority of flavors that you see in chai are actually herbal. So like strawberry, ginger, lemon, mint, jasmine, and I'm missing one. There's one more. I know it's in there, but there's 6 of those. But traditionally, you would add nothing to it. You just have straight up green tea. So for us to blend both worlds, like the herbal tea drinkers and then the normal tea connoisseurs who don't add anything, we thought having different players being master merchants of their green or oolong tea, what have you, would be a really good fit.
Yeah, and I think one thing about what you did was you didn't just do Kickstarter. I know that your team was, for example, at PAX Unplugged. You were out there, you were showcasing this game, and you were out there talking to people, you were taking feedback. What did you learn from the process of Kickstarter that has benefited you as you move forward? Because obviously that first game and getting it under your belt, it is an accomplishment, and not everyone does well with their first one. There are definitely some nightmare stories out there. So what was your greatest lesson from this? Because I'm sure that there's plenty of people who want to create a game. They haven't got to the point where they've even gotten your Kickstarter, but I'm sure you've got some lessons that they can learn from.
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, even if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably really immersed into the hobby, and you have all these intangible things that you know already. Like you might have an idea of, there's different kinds of box finishes, whether it's, shiny UV or like a really matted difference. Like there's just so many different ways you can go about the entire industry. A seasoned publisher told us, you have to ask yourself first off, are you a designer? Do you want to be a publisher and start your own business? Or are you just trying to create something for fun? So for us, we were a designer and a hobbyist first, and then we realized, hey, let's give it a try. And if someone picks up chai later down the road, that's cool too. We had no idea about fulfillment. If I'm completely honest, we even sort of made up our prices for the initial campaign. There's so much research you can put in advance, but at the end of the day, if you create something, you just gotta release it. So we added some buffer in different ways. We really appreciate people buying, let's say, the play mats. So that helped us recoup our shipping costs. We had no idea that like shipping on most Kickstarters is subsidized. There's one up right now on GameFound, ISS Fan Card, and their shipping, I think, is $55 American just to get it to North America. And that's actually the cost for their game. If you see free shipping, for a $30 card game, the publisher is picking it up. So yeah, we're just trying to, navigate this new world. It's become my full-time job. We have another full-time employee, and Connie helps out as well, but she's a full-time grade 4 school teacher. So yeah, just figure out what you want going in and try to manage that.
Well, that's a really, you give me a perfect lead in. I had to ask, board games, education, there's an interconnection. I had a question actually that someone posed on Twitter earlier, really around this idea of why aren't we doing more of board games with education out there? What is this? And I know it's happening, but certainly not at a mass scale of any kind. Where do you think board games, from your perspective, and obviously you have a unique one, having someone in your life who was obviously involved with Chai as well, who is in that world. Where do you think these fit in education right now here in 2021?
Totally. Both my parents are teachers. My mom's a piano teacher on the side. My dad's taught chemistry his whole life, but he always had an active chess club and board game club at his schools. Now Connie does at hers. And the whole concept of gamification is really important in the educational world. So how do you make things exciting for kids? And in that sense, how do you give them an incentive in order to learn? And sometimes making those learning activities with a fun component really incentivizes the kids to keep on learning, whether it's like memorizing something or board games have a lot in common with math, as you know. Or of course, for me with chess, it's memorization, like different patterns and strategies. And Connie was mentioning to me today that a lot of educators, they struggle with how much can you do games, but also make sure that the curriculum is involved. So we've all played games that aren't a lot of fun. You're like, oh, you're just, flipping over two cards and hoping they're matching. That might be fun for some people, but overall, if you play that for 5 hours, like you're gonna lose the appeal. Or roll and moves, right? In a lot of schools, it's antiquated, where Monopoly or a version of that might be really common. So yeah, I think it's up to us board game designers and creators to really infiltrate in a good way the education markets and keep making games that are accessible. Connie taught for a few years kids on the ASD spectrum, so autism or Down syndrome, and they really enjoyed simpler games that had not so simple in rules, sorry, but just in terms of the actions that it takes, but that they would be very tactile, because then you can pick up the pieces and you're physically doing something. And that's a really important thing for educators to realize, that for games or education, it's not just a cerebral activity, but that we're using our entire body in experiencing and learning something. So yeah, we try to embody that in our games. Not sure if we do an amazing job yet, but Connie's been putting a lot of thought into that. So another example would be like Azul,
yeah, where
you're matching colors and patterns, and then you're physically moving them across. Or Carcass.
You bring up a great point that I don't think I've even thought about, which is now we're talking about component or component quality, right? But having a nice chunky piece, for example, there's a game that gets played a lot in my house called Hive. And Hive is a fantastic little 2-player game. It's portable. It's chess-like. I think it's fair to say it's chess-like. And that game in particular, that there is a value to that chunkiness of those pieces and that picking up. But there's something else you talked about, and you used for the accessible. And I think of accessible in two ways with games. One, is it really accessible to the family who's used to, say, a Monopoly? Are we going to be able to get these people to play that? And I don't want to say the mom or the dad or the grandpa, because I don't think that's fair, because one day I'm going to be the grandpa who plays, right? But I think it is fair to say that we want it to be accessible in that way. But the other accessible piece, and I know this is at your core, is creating games that really are accessible, and there is accessibility in board gaming. How do you face that challenge, in the sense of there's color blindness and all these other things? Right. As a designer, how do you really think about that in the crafting of a game?
Yeah, I think you said it really well. Yesterday, we actually just were talking with our factory. They're making these little tins with different colors, and we had to make sure that there wasn't a lot of color issues with, I think it's called deuteranopia. It's a type of color blindness. There's different charts that are available online that you can check to make sure that the colors aren't too similar altogether. So I had no idea that green and blue are difficult to see for the majority of colorblind people, and there's a whole spectrum of the blindness as well. So yeah, just being very mindful of that. That also means that we need to use symbols for unique tokens instead of the same shapes altogether. So someone playing Ticket for Ride, I know a friend, they have to put little dots on some of the blue trains just so that they can tell the difference for them. So just things I would have no idea of, right? But you're trying to basically remove barriers for people to not only enjoy your game, but to appreciate it fully.
And I can speak to the blue and black. I have some it's minor, but I have some issues with certain shades of that. So it's certainly more difficult in some games than others, but I think it's appreciated. The fact that you're thinking about it, obviously, as a designer is so important because obviously I know you've probably got experience with that in that world too. When you think about games, one of the things that we just came off of a video, myself and Anthony, who will be on this channel quite a bit, uh, board game board game dads on Twitter and Instagram. I was talking to him about our 10 favorite games of 2020, and by this we meant games played. We don't mean our favorite game from 2020. I gotta ask, what comes to mind for you in terms of games that you maybe got to the table, some of your best experiences that you had? Because the thing that we really were hitting on, and I think was important, was games are fun. And these were the games that brought us the best memories. And in my particular case on this video, I will tell you, I spoke a lot to a game that I love, which is Raiders of the North Sea, which is, it's just one of my favorite games. My son beat me at 7. And that's a game for 12 plus on the box. And this is why I say, forget the box, right? So that's the kind of experience I'm talking about. Like for you, obviously, you're playing games often. What games were really memorable for you this year?
Right. And it's really surprising. I thought becoming more of a designer, you'd play more games, but you end up playing your own game many times. So I'm a little bit chied out at the moment because I've played it like 200 times over the last 2 years. I'll still crack it open and we'll play. And I'll lose regularly because there's a good amount of like family luck in it, the way the things you draw. But yeah, for us, probably this year, it was Tiny Towns.
Good choice.
And that was in the first quarter, like pre-COVID, basically. But we've really enjoyed having, I guess, way back then when we had different monthly meetups or we invited friends over each week. There's always one person at the table that's more new to board games than the rest of us. So making sure that we pick a game that you can teach within like 3 to 4 minutes, that they can jump in right away and there's not a lot of downtime, I think is really critical as we, basically have a hobby that's becoming more mainstream. It's awesome to see that, games are becoming super popular. Ones like Villainous, you'll find at Target or online. So just making sure that, people aren't getting bored at the table, that there's a lot of interaction going on. The Crew was another sleeper hit for us. We were excited to play. It's you probably played a co-op trick-taking game where you have different objectives. So,
it's sitting on my desk. It's one of my top games.
Cool.
I have to say, I love that game. You're right. The Crew in particular stood out because I think it is so easy to teach. And I also read a review somewhere recently where they were saying it wasn't a game that they played, and I kind of disagree with it. It wasn't a game that they played with people who didn't do trick-taking. It was the introduction for trick-taking to my family because the first few missions are a nice introduction. Fantastic game. I had to show it because it's so good. People buy it.
And it's very reasonable. I mean, most games are big box, and if you can take something like The Crew or Hive camping or whatnot in the future, that's huge.
Yeah, well, I will say this. One, speaking of camping, I saw you had some beautiful photos on Instagram the other day, so I'm going to encourage people to go. Because it was Twitter or Instagram. I can't remember where. But you were out in nature the other day, so I was very jealous of you. It looked beautiful. I do want to give people a chance to make sure they follow Steeped Games. More good stuff, I'm sure, coming our way. Is there anything, any Kickstarters, any updates or anything worth sharing at this time that you have out, or any updates for those who are fans of Steeped Games who may be turning this in that you would want to just say, and even if it's a basic message to those who have supported the Chai community so far, because you have a great, by the way, I'll plug a link in the comments, but you've got a great Facebook community too, where you speak out to everybody. I know. Yeah,
well, we try to make it as personal as we can, but as we grow, like that has growing pains for sure as well. COVID had a lot of setbacks for publishers, so we're just putting the recent reprint of Chai on the boats right now. So
nice.
It's honestly eye-opening every month how much stuff we learn and figure out. So it's been cool to see the community grow. We have some exciting projects that I probably can't share at this moment, but we have been working on Tea for Two for the last 2 years. And this morning, actually, the world's leading expert for tea clippers So like these massive fast ships that were in different competitions between primarily London and China. He wrote back and said he'd love to do an introduction in our rule books. So yeah, we're really excited for that, and he can help us make sure that like the game's historically accurate, because we know a lot of T fans and ourselves included, like we love that precision. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, before you go, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to you. Thank you to everyone, of course, for taking the time to listen today. This obviously is the first of Creators Corner, and I'm looking forward to hopefully having many more conversations here in 2021. And it's been great to get a chance to know you a little bit better, Dan. So thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. And thank you to everyone else for coming aboard the Tabletop Express today. We'll be back with more videos in the weeks to come. Later next week, if you're listening to this live, we will be looking at a Wingspan video talking about the digital version, actually, and a little bit about why this may be worth your time to play. And also as a great introduction. The cool thing is I will be talking about it as a person who's never played the actual game and only the digital version. And Anthony will be back to talk about the game having played both. So you get a few different perspectives. We think it's going to be a good one. So tune in. That'll be sometime next week. Follow Tabletop Express on Twitter and Facebook, and you'll be able to get all the updates about when that's going to drop. And with that said, thank you again for coming aboard the Tabletop Express. We'll see you very soon.